If you can get the players through these 3 weeks without a lot of positive tests, hopefully with no positive tests, then I think you've gone a long way towards convincing them that what you have in place works.
Baseball is back. The MLB's summer camp has officially begun as fans count down to opening day.
The players are now in the thick of spring training 2.0.
We've been preparing, getting ready for a return to baseball.
I have faith that we can get through this and get through it safely.
The players are just really excited to get back to doing what they love to do.
Once we hit the field, it was almost like camp. I feel like baseball is back, we are back.
They will have just 3 weeks to get ready for the start of the regular season.
There is only going to be one coronavirus World Series champion. I don't see why you wouldn't want to take that trophy home. You're competing against your peers, and there's only going to be one of them.
In under 3 weeks, the pursuit of the coronavirus World Series champion begins, and that's why we welcome you to Blue Jay Central at home, soon to be known as Blue Jay Central from a studio, because the baseball season is going to start in late July. Here's JP Morosi from his home in Michigan. Jeff Blair is with us as well, and Joe Siddall of Blue Jay Central. And Joe, will begin with you. We've seen, for example, JP was at Wrigley Field recently. We've seen some of these summer camps underway. We have yet to see, though, the Blue Jays get started in a shortened season. Do you think this delay will hurt them in any way?
It certainly can hurt them. I think it's going to be tough and challenging for all players across Major League Baseball. There's been an awkward layoff here. Guys are trying to ramp back up. And now it's going to be a very short summer camp or spring training 2.0, whatever it is that you want to call it. Blue Jays will be assembling a little bit later. And sure, they have been doing some things down in Florida. But the challenge to me for pitchers is monitoring those workloads. How much have guys been doing while they're off? So there'll be a lot of work behind the scenes by the pitching coaches managing workloads, because they're going to be at different levels. Some guys may start the season throwing 4 or 5 innings. Others may be 2 or 3 innings. So it'll be interesting to see how they address that issue. But more importantly, for the hitters, position players, I find that spring training's for pitchers and catchers, right? They get down there early, they get the work in. So hitters don't need that full spring training. But after this long layoff and the fact that we are not going to see many, if any, exhibition games, and that to me is a big one, because as a hitter, there is nothing worse than facing your own pitchers. There's nothing worse than live BP and simulated games and inter-squad games as a hitter, because it just feels like, especially with nobody in the stands, it's going to feel like every pitcher's throwing 100 miles per hour. It's just very awkward as a hitter. I don't think there's a hitter alive that likes those situations. So that'll be the big challenge. And remember, in a short 60-game season, there is not going to be a lot of time to get off to a slow start as a hitter. And inevitably, a lot of guys will. You have a bad 20 games, that's not really fixable right away. That's a 30-year season.
So it's win from the beginning if you can. And Jeff, if the Blue Jays choose to hold back Nate Pearson for about a week, they can gain an extra year of service time. Shai Davidi posted an article about this on sportsnet.ca. He says you have to have him right from the beginning. What do you say?
I think I need to see how my other pitchers are before I make a decision on Nate Pearson. Look, at this point, there are going to be enough financial demands on teams. If delaying it by a week buys you an extra year, again, not knowing what the new CBA will look like, but if delaying it by a week buys you an extra year, what are we talking, a start? I'm okay with keeping Nate Pearson aside for a week if that's going to make a difference. But before I do that, I need to see what else I have. If Nate Pearson is the best pitcher in camp, and that is entirely possible, by the way, if Nate Pearson is the best pitcher in camp, then I think you address it a little differently. But I'm not entirely certain if a week's going to make that much of a difference, to be honest. It's not like we're talking about a hitter. We're talking about a pitcher, so maybe 1 or 2 starts, 1 or 2 appearances, depending on how they want to use them. I'd be okay. I'd be okay giving them a week to do that.
JP, you've attended one of these summer camps, and I know this because I saw you on television wearing a mask recently from Wrigley Field. What do they look like?
Well, Jamie, it's very unique. Even just from the ingress and egress to the ballpark, you get your temperature checked, you get a pink wristband. It was the case at Wrigley Field to make sure that you were healthy enough to even be in there, despite the fact that you were coming nowhere close to the players themselves. The closest I came, I was in the left field corner of Wrigley Field. I could shout down and say hello to a couple of the people who were shagging flies at the time, but that was about it in terms of actually being able to interact with anybody. So very unique. Yes, doing the stand-up with a mask on is unique. I had to modulate my breathing a little differently, but again, a small issue and a small sacrifice to pay in the grand scheme of things, just to be able to be back in the ballpark and doing work in comparison to what everybody else has been doing the last few months that have really been helping sustain life in society during that time. So, but it's been very unique. And I think, Jamie, we're all doing our jobs differently. A lot of conferences like this, in terms of our access during the course of the year, it's going to be very, very unique. And also to Joe's point about just the general competition and how you get ready. I had a player tell me the last couple of days that, yes, from a hitting standpoint, timing is going to be a challenge. And then the overall game speed, defensively, running the bases, the things that you don't really pick up unless you're playing games. To Joe's point, we're really not seeing that happen overall. And finally, we saw over the weekend the really difficult incident there at Yankee Stadium with Giancarlo Stanton hitting the line drive off his teammate Masahiro Tanaka. As Joe pointed out, that's like your worst nightmare as a baseball player. And really, it's going on now, that nervousness in every camp at this point here with summer camp getting underway.
On the subject of the Blue Jays, JP, you seem to think that given their youth, they might surprise a few people. Explain why.
I do, Jamie. I think overall, and the point about different players considering to play or not to play, when you've got a young team, which the Blue Jays have, and players who have not made their money yet, who have not really made their mark in the game, broadly speaking, on this team, there's a lot of incentive to stay in there and stay invested. I think on a veteran club, if you have a rough 15, 20 game start, you might start to see that want to and that commitment to the overall effort in this very unique season start to fade a little bit. But for the Blue Jays, so many of these players are still trying to earn that first salary arbitration raise and earn that first major contract. That is going to keep this team invested. So as long as they're 500, I believe, after the first 15 or 20 games, this is going to be a team to be reckoned with and a possible playoff team, I believe, in the American League this year.
We are slowly seeing some players choose to opt out, and they have that right. Most recently, David Price was one. Two men who have decided not to, at least at this point, Bryce Harper and Mike Trout, still had this to say. Listen.
So what made you feel comfortable with this current layout?
Honestly, still don't feel comfortable.
I think it gets to the point where you are kind of uncomfortable just because I do have an infant at home. I have a wife at home. I have a pregnant wife at home. So, I mean, I'm just trying to do everything possible to prevent anything from happening.
If there's an outbreak or something happens, these next few weeks, you definitely got to consider. I definitely got to reconsider. It's just, there's a lot of questions.
So I understand why certain individuals will be, possibly not very optimistic about this or, just don't feel comfortable.
I talk to a lot of guys across the league and they're texting me a lot. I'm not gonna name any names, but just, it's just a crazy, they're all thinking the same thing. Is this gonna work?
Just heard Trout say there are lots of players he's texting that are thinking about it. Back to you, JP, on this one. If more and more choose to opt out, what does that mean for baseball?
Well, Jamie, it's a great question. And certainly there is already a unique context around the 2020 season. We all know that's the case. And I think if you see more and more notable players not playing, it does probably call into a bit of a question the overall context of the season and maybe cause a bit of concern on the part of the league. But overall, I think first and foremost, fans have to recognize that these are people first and foremost. In many cases with families or pregnant wives, they're concerned about that first and foremost. In that respect, baseball is the same as any other workplace. We're all having to make our own decisions about what we're comfortable doing at this point in time. And the players, despite all the money and the adulation that comes with being a Major League Baseball player, they're really no different in that respect. So I would say that we're going to probably see more and more players opt out, but it really does, I think, just enhance the importance that the players who are there, as Joe Madden has alluded to as well recently, the players who are there must truly be fully invested in that decision and all the protocols that go along with it. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, that those away from the ballpark protocols are probably some of the most important things going on in baseball here in 2020.
Jeff, what's your take on this? Because let's be honest, if Mike Trout says this is not worth my time, it must start to stir the thoughts of some of these younger players that are trying to make their mark in big league baseball too, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I think in a lot of ways we're kind of overthinking this. I mean, here's the thing. The sports that have come back, the soccer leagues, let's talk about the Bundesliga. They finished their season without one positive test once the players are in that environment. What baseball has to do over the next 3 weeks is sell its players on the idea that they not only have a plan to control or eliminate the spread of coronavirus, more importantly, they have a plan that addresses what happens when somebody tests positive. How do we treat that person? How do we deal with them? If you can get the players through these 3 weeks without a lot of positive tests in camp, because up to this point, all these positive tests have been entry tests, right? If you can get the players through these 3 weeks without a lot of positive tests, hopefully with no positive tests, then I think you've gone a long way towards convincing them that what you have in place works. And let's keep this in mind. I mean, this is how difficult it is. MLS, Major League Soccer, has brought its teams into Orlando, into a hub concept. They've had a team, the Columbus Crew, show up with no positive tests and have a player test positive after he has been in quarantine for a couple of days. That's the danger for me in baseball. If they can control it in camp, if they can sell the players on the idea that we really know what we're doing, and there is an element of confidence and trust that does have to be rebuilt after this labor dispute, if they can convince the players that's the case, I think they'll be okay.
Joe, let's say you're back playing Major League Baseball and you're a backup catcher. And listen, there's no shame in a pandemic in saying, I don't feel comfortable doing this. And one of your best players on your team, a contending team, says, I'm opting out. As a teammate, how does that make you feel, and what does it make you think?
Well, it make me feel very uneasy that one of the top players and probably the leaders on your team is opting out. But at the same time, when I'm a backup catcher and I'm newer into the league, I'm not making a whole lot of money. You'd love to make part of that little salary anyway and accumulate a little bit more service time. So that's why I felt that before all this came down and when the owners imposed this season on the players, I felt that we may see this from some veteran players that have made their money over the course of the career. Maybe they've got upwards or near 10 years of service time to maximize their pension. So that's why I thought we might hear from those types of players. Are we starting to? Yes, but it'll be very interesting to see how that snowballs from here. We heard from Trout, we heard from Harper and guys like that. If the big names like that go do more, continue to follow behind them. And as they alluded to, they're talking to each other. So this will be an ongoing conversation over the next few weeks. But I think as a young player, if I feel safe enough with the health and safety protocols in place, I will take that chance, as JP alluded to, as we all do in all our walks of life. Whatever job you're in, everyone is taking on risk. But I think as a player in that situation, I'd be playing.
JP, you've got something to add here?
Yes, Joe. I think that Joe made a great point about the young players in particular. Let's remember the overall picture of baseball right now. You've got the next CBA coming up after the 2021 season. I think there's a lot of anxiety among the young players just to prove their place in the game overall. I think we're going to see teams probably spending less money in free agency this wintertime. If you are in that 0 to 3 years of service time category, you are doing everything that you can to impress your organization and other organizations, because we're at a point in the game where jobs just seem to be scarce overall because of the economics of the sport. So I really think Joe had made an excellent point that for the young players in particular, we're not going to see a lot of young players, I believe, opting out because they realize how precious this time is to ensure your place in the sport for years to come.
And Jeff, you might see players in the major leagues this year that you wouldn't otherwise see. I mean, consider some of the names on the Blue Jays extended roster of 60 players. I mean, is it possible that we see their first pick in the draft, Austin Martin, in the big leagues at some point this year?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the intriguing question here. There are a lot of teams, the Blue Jays among them, that I think are probably looking at their roster right now. And for the first time this year, honestly thinking, what do we do if we're in the race? I'm not certain that at any point before the pandemic, Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro were thinking, okay, if we're in the race in September, do we think of bringing Jordan Groshans up? I mean, how are we? The whole dynamic of how you develop and how you utilize your young players has changed, not just because of the pandemic and the elimination of the minor leagues, because of the fact that in a shortened season, everybody's odds have improved for the most part. I mean, there's no team out there right now. I don't think any of us would be comfortable I don't know, maybe the Detroit Tigers, all due respect, JP. I don't think there are too many teams out there we'd be comfortable saying this team's got absolutely no shot. So I think there are going to be a lot of interesting calculations and decisions made.
Well, we'll continue this kind of discussion again, probably from a studio sometime soon. JP, you're in a hot spot known as the United States, so stay safe. And thanks for joining us. And thank you, Jeff Blair and Joe Siddall, for this edition of Blue Jays Central at Home.